Next in my conference tournament predictions is the Big 12 Conference, and the Big 12 might be the best conference in all of college basketball this season. And with all of the elite teams and players throughout this bracket, this could end up being the best power conference tournament we see this year. But before we begin, if you enjoy the content, please consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. And now, let's jump into it. And starting off our Big 12 predictions, we have the Baylor Bears as the 13th seed in the Big 12 tournament, and then Arizona State is the 12th seed in the tournament. And in their one game that they played in the regular season, Baylor was able to pick up a home win against the Sun Devils, 73-68. But this might be the best matchup that we have in the first round of the tournament. For the Baylor Bears, the storyline is Cameron Carr and Tunde Yesufu, the two NBA draft prospects that Scott Drew has there in Waco. They have been awesome on the offensive end for Baylor all season long and have honestly carried them for most of the way. Then you also have guys like Obi Agbim, Dan Skillings, Michael Rataj, even Isaac Williams, who has stepped up as the point guard for that team. And then they rely heavily on Caden Powell as the big man. But this team is really undersized, which could be an issue when facing Arizona State on a neutral floor, because they have Masamba Diop there, the freshman 7'1" center for the Sun Devils, and he has had an amazing season so far. In their first matchup, he was able to grab 10 boards, and he only had 10 points as well, but still finished with a double-double. And then obviously you have the best player on Arizona State, the senior guard in Mo Odom. And really the biggest question for me is if Baylor can limit the Sun Devils on the interior, if they can make sure that they don't grab those offensive rebounds and grab the boards and get out in transition and score. And if they can do that, I do think Baylor can win this. And so I am probably going to lean Baylor just due to their offensive upside that they have and that guard play between Yesufu and Carr. And I believe if they can score quickly and create their own shots like they do, I think Baylor's shot making is going to be able to get them through this matchup, and honestly is going to make them one of the most dangerous teams in this tournament. Moving down to our next game, we have the Utah Utes going up against the Cincinnati Bearcats. And for Utah, this is definitely the worst team in the entire Big 12. They're just 10-21 on the season and 2-16 in conference play, and they've lost their last 5 games. And then for Cincinnati, they're coming in on a high note right now because they're actually 6-2 in their last 8 games, although they did drop their final regular season game against TCU. But this team is playing to get into the NCAA tournament. They were able to turn it around under Wes Miller and get to 17-14 on the season and 9-9 in Big 12 play. And although right now in the NCAA tournament picture, they are on the outside looking in, I do think if Cincinnati is able to make a bit of a run in the Big 12 tournament, they do have a shot at making it to the dance. So this team is going to be playing hard. And when you look at the matchup, Cincinnati is by far the better team, especially on the defensive end. But on offense, you still have guys like Day Thomas, Baba Miller, Mustafa Thiam. Jizzle James is back with this team and helping in the backcourt as well. Honestly, Cincinnati just matches up better at just about every single position than the Utes. For Utah, the big names are Terrence Brown and Keanu Dawes. These guys can go get a bucket when they need to, but I think Cincinnati's defense is going to focus in on them, and they're not going to be able to do as much as they would like. And so for me, I am going to be picking Cincinnati, and I just think that their physicality on the defensive end and then their ability to disrupt Utah's tempo is going to be something that's going to be an issue for them. Also, they won their initial matchup 69-65 against Utah, and I think this one, with the way that Cincinnati's been playing, might be an even bigger beatdown. So I'm picking Cincinnati to move on in this one. Moving on down to our next matchup, we have Kansas State as the 15 seed going up against AJ Dubanta and BYU there as the 10 seed. And for BYU, ever since that Richie Saunders injury, they have been struggling. They've lost 3 of their last 4 games, but were able to end the regular season on a high note, beating a trending Texas Tech team there at home. And then you're going up against a Kansas State team that is just 3-15 in conference play. They fired Jerome Tang earlier in the season, and this team has just gone downhill ever since conference play began. And actually, in their first matchup in conference, it was with BYU, and Kansas State lost by 10 at home. But one thing I will say is this is going to be an offense-heavy type of game. If you've watched Kansas State, they do have the ability to score, put up 100 points multiple times this season. They have a guy in PJ Haggerty who is one of the top scorers in all of college basketball. You also have a lot of shooters around him in Abdi Bashir. Guys like Nate Johnson and David Castillo can both step out and hit the three at times. But then obviously on the BYU side, you have AJ DeBanza, who is the leading scorer of all of college basketball. Robert Wright has looked like one of the best guards in the Big 12 this season, but they are missing Richie Saunders, which definitely is going to hurt their ceiling in the Big 12 tournament and also in March Madness. But one person that I thought was an X factor for this team and actually looks like he's starting to step up is Kennard Davis. In their last game against Texas Tech, when they were able to pick up that win, Kennard Davis chipped in 16 points. And if they can get double-digit scoring from him on a consistent night and then maybe get some scoring from some guys off the bench as well as Keba Keita, I think this team can do some damage in the Big 12 tournament. Now, I'm not predicting them to win it by any means, but I do think BYU is going to be able to pick up this win. I think they have enough pieces to get past this Kansas State team that has just had a horrible season so far and probably just wants to get this year over with. So I'm sticking with AJ DeBanza and BYU to get this one and move on past Kansas State. And in our last matchup of the first round of the Big 12 tournament, we have Oklahoma State as the 14 seed taking on Colorado as the 11 seed. And for the Oklahoma State Cowboys, they started off so strong. We're 12-1 through their first 13 games, and now they're just 18-13 and 6-12 in the Big 12. Then for Colorado, they're 17-14 and 7-11. I think Colorado's been a little better than a lot of us had originally thought. And so Tab Boyle's team really looking to be moving in the right direction. They have a really good freshman guard in Isaiah Johnson, who does a lot for this team. Also goes alongside transfer guard Barrington Hargis there in the backcourt. Bengot Dak is a 7-footer that they like to play, and he's really good there in the paint as well. And for Oklahoma State, they're missing their heart and soul, Parsifala there, who got injured a few games ago and is now out for the season. But they actually were able to pick up a big win against UCF on the road in overtime a few games ago, and then took Houston to the brink, only lost by 7 in their final game of the season. For Colorado, they face Arizona in their final game of the season, lost by 10. So both teams are coming off of losses, and in their one matchup so far this season, Colorado was able to get the win 83-69 against Oklahoma State, and that was at home. And I think for this team, they can lean a lot on their backcourt of Barrington Hargis and Isaiah Johnson. They've done a lot for them offensively so far this season, and I don't see that slowing down. For Oklahoma State, they are one of the higher scoring teams in the country, especially at the early part of the season, so they do have a lot of good offense of their own. You got a really good point guard in Kanye Clary, and then Anthony Roy, who was leading the country in scoring last season at Green Bay. Victorious Miller, a former 5-star. They have a lot of good pieces that have helped them win some really good games this season, but I think I like Colorado a bit more. I trust that backcourt of Isaiah Johnson and Barrington Hargis to be more consistent, and then the size. Without Parsifala for Oklahoma State, this team has to lean on Benjamin Ahmed, which is a freshman big, also Christian Coleman, who is a bit inconsistent at times, and so I do believe Colorado has a bit more consistency to them. I also like that they won their initial matchup, so I have the Buffs winning this one and advancing to the second round. All right, so in our first matchup of the second round, we have Baylor going up against Iowa State as the 5 seed, and the Cyclones were able to win both of the regular season matchups between these two teams. They won 70-60 on the road at Baylor, and then picked a close one up against Baylor at home, 72-69. And in those matchups, the biggest thing was Joshua Jefferson and Blake Buchanan were just able to be bigger and dominate on the interior against this Baylor team. Baylor does not have the size to compete with a lot of these teams that are bigger in the front court, and I think that's given them a lot of issues in all of their games so far this season, and I believe that's going to be the trend in this one. I also just like Iowa State on the defensive end, a top 10 defensive team. If they can lock in on a Cameron Carr and Tunde Yesufu and force others to beat you, I don't think Baylor has enough scoring outside of those two in order to get the job done. And then also for Iowa State, they are a lot better this season on the offensive end. Top 25 in effective field goal percentage. They're 15th in three-point percentage. You have a guy in Milan Momcilovic that can stretch the floor and might be the best shooter of all of college basketball. And then Tamin Lipsey there at the point guard spot for Iowa State, and I just trust him more than any guard that Baylor is going to throw at the Cyclones. So I think even though it is hard to win and beat a team 3 times in one season, I think Iowa State gets it done and gets past Baylor to move on to the quarterfinals. Next, we have Cincinnati going up against UCF, and UCF is the 8th seed here in the Big 12 tournament, and these two teams actually had 2 different matchups in the regular season, and they split them with both home teams winning in those games. In the game where Cincinnati was the home team, they actually were able to pick up a 20-point win, 92-72, and that was the game that was able to start Cincinnati's run of finishing the regular season at 6-2, and then in the first game, that's when UCF was able to pick up a 1-point win at home over Cincinnati. And looking at this, it's really offense first defense, but right now UCF is struggling. They've lost their last 3 games ending the regular season to right now non-tournament teams in Baylor, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. And although all of those teams are decent, they aren't any teams that they're going to be facing in March Madness, and I think Cincinnati is a step above those teams right now. For Cincinnati, like I mentioned, they're finished the season on a 6-2 streak, have now gotten to 9-9 in Big 12 play, which actually ties UCF. And for the most part, in those 2 matchups, Cincinnati was able to limit Demas Folks. He actually didn't score in double figures in either of those games, but the next few things they'll have to do is they're going to have to stop Riley Kugel from the perimeter and then contain Jordan Burks and JaMychal Stillwell as well. But I think right now with the way Cincinnati's playing and their length, that has given UCF trouble, and I think it's going to continue to do so. I also really like that Cincinnati has the 7-footer in Mustafa Thiam. I think he will do huge work in this game, also playing his former team in UCF because he transferred from the Golden Knights there to the Bearcats this season. And right now, I believe UCF is in even if they lose, but Cincinnati needs this win in order to even have a chance of making the NCAA tournament. So I think Wes Miller and the Bearcats just want this one more, and they're able to pick up the win and move on to face Arizona in the next round. And now we have BYU going up against the 7 seed in the West Virginia Mountaineers, and we only saw this matchup one time in the regular season, but West Virginia actually was able to pick up the home win against the Cougars 79-71. But right now, both teams coming off of a win heading into postseason play, and I think this one might go a little differently in that matchup between West Virginia and BYU for their one and only meeting in the regular season right now. AJ Dybantsa, I felt like wasn't asserting himself as much as he should have. Also, he settled. He shot 7 threes, which is more than most games. And for AJ Dybantsa and BYU to be successful, they need him to be aggressive from start to finish. Also, Robert Wright, he had a decent game as well, but ended up only having 4 assists to 2 turnovers. And so BYU is going to have to limit the turnovers, and those 2 are going to have to be more aggressive. But if they can get one other guy to step up, like a Kennard Davis or a Keba Keita or Boskovic or Kostic or one of those other guys to help them and get double-digit points, I do think BYU has what it takes to win this game. For West Virginia, you have Honor Huff, and he's going to have a great game in order for this team to beat the Cougars. I also think guys like Jasper Floyd are going to be really big in this one. And so the biggest thing is, can BYU stop an Honor Huff on the defensive end? And then can the Cougars also have someone else that can chip in on the offensive end and give them some more points? I think that happens in this one. So I'm sticking with AJ Dybantsa and BYU to get another win and move on to face Houston in the quarterfinals. And in our last matchup of the second round, we have Colorado taking on the 6-seeded TCU Horned Frogs. And in this one, I think it's going to be a really close game. The first matchup, however, was not. Colorado absolutely dominated TCU at home, winning 87-61 over the Horned Frogs. In that one, it was a full team effort. Isaiah Johnson, Barrington Hargress, Sebastian Rancic all had really good games, as well as Bangkok Dak. But in this one, I think it might be a little different. Right now, TCU is trending in the right direction. They've won their last 5 games to end the regular season and have won 8 of their last 9, with that only loss coming on the road at UCF. For Colorado, they've actually lost 2 of their last 3, but it was to Houston and Arizona, and I think this game would be a lot closer. For the Horned Frogs, they're safely in the NCAA tournament to me, so I do think it's not necessarily as much of a must-win game for them, but it wouldn't be bad to win another one just to be sure, in case there are some bid thieves that get in the way for the Horned Frogs. For Colorado, obviously, they're playing not to end their season here, and so I think this would be a really good matchup. The size of Colorado could give TCU some trouble, because TCU is not a particularly tall team. They only go 6'8" in the lineup of players that actually play, but then you have a guy like David Punch at 6'7", Micah Robinson at 6'6", so they do have some really good size there in the wing position. And then Brock Harding and Jaden Pierre, those are 2 guys that really have been good for the TCU Horned Frogs in the backcourt. And then when you look at TCU and what they've been able to do this season, I mean, they have wins over Florida and Wisconsin, took Michigan to the absolute brink, probably should have won that game. They also were able to pick up a win over Iowa State and Texas Tech, so really good wins for a team on the bubble. And then going up against a Colorado team that, besides that TCU win, I haven't been that impressed with any of their other results, so I am going to be sticking with TCU. Although they got blown out in the first one, I think they're able to game plan, match back up, and get the win in this one and advance to the quarterfinals. And our first matchup in the quarterfinals is the Iowa State Cyclones going up against the Texas Tech Red Raiders as the 4th seed. And in their one matchup this season, Texas Tech was able to go on the road to Hilton Coliseum and knock off the Cyclones in a big way. They won 82-73 there in Hilton, and the biggest part wasn't even necessarily the win. It was the fact that they were able to do that without JT Toppin, who got injured a few games before and suffered that season-ending injury. So Texas Tech will be without him for the rest of the year. However, after that win against Iowa State, Tech has now lost back-to-back games against TCU and BYU. For Iowa State, after that loss to Tech, they took another loss to Arizona, but then bounced back in their regular season finale against Arizona State. I think this team, for Iowa State, the big thing is going to be slowing down Christian Anderson, because right now, without JT Toppin, he basically does it all for this Red Raiders team. If he's not scoring the ball, he's assisting on their buckets. And in that game where they lost to the Red Raiders, although Christian Anderson only had 14 points, he also had 7 assists, and he was getting the ball to guys like Donovan Atwell, Jalen Petty, Lawan Watts, Luke Bamboya, Jamal Mosley, Tyree Bryan. They all stepped up. And so the biggest thing for me is if Iowa State can slow down Christian Anderson and limit him, as well as close out on shooters, I do think they have the ability and can definitely win this game. For Texas Tech, they're just going to have to continue to play team basketball without JT Toppin, because when you had Toppin, you had a guy that you could throw it down low, and he was pretty much automatic down there. Now, without him, they have to completely shift their game plan, but Graham McCasland, one of the best coaches in the country, if anyone can do it, he can. So I do think this is going to be a close matchup, but I think Iowa State gets revenge on the Red Raiders and gets the win and advances to the semifinals against Arizona. And up next, we have Cincinnati taking on Arizona, and this would be Cincinnati's 3rd game in 3 days, but looking at their resume at this point, they would be 19-14, but would still probably need another win or 2 in order to solidify themselves as a tournament team. So they would be doing anything and everything they can in this matchup to get the win. In their first matchup in the regular season against Arizona, they took the loss 77-51 on the road at Arizona. And for the Wildcats, they were able to get get whatever they wanted in the paint. Mo Krivas went off going for 17 and 9 in that one. And then on the Cincinnati side, it was really Baba Miller and Shauna Bayev. Everyone else basically were non-factors. They shot less than 20% from three-point range. And looking at this matchup, I think Cincinnati, although they have a great defense, I just don't know if they have anyone that can stop that front court. You have Mustafa Thiem at 7'2", and I think Mo Krivas matches up with him. But then you still have guys like Toby Awaka and Koa Pete that you have to account for. And then also for this Arizona team, you have a guy like Braden Burries and Jaden Bradley, probably one of the best backcourts in the entire Big 12. Also, your wings of Anthony Del Orso and Ivan Karchenkov. This team just has too much right now, and I'm not sure Cincinnati, even with them giving it their all, are going to be able to match up with what Arizona can do. That positional size that Arizona brings, I think, would give them an issue. And outside of those back-to-back losses against Kansas and Texas Tech in the middle of conference play, Arizona has basically been perfect, and I don't see Cincinnati being able to stack up and win this one. So I have Arizona advancing to the semifinal matchup against Iowa State. Next, we have BYU taking on the 2-seeded Houston Cougars, and this one just seems like it might be a little too much for BYU. Houston ended the season on a 3-game winning streak, beating Colorado, Baylor, and Oklahoma State. And for BYU, we all know they were struggling since that Richie Saunders injury, but they did get that win over Texas Tech to end the season. In the game that they played earlier in the year, Houston went on the road and beat BYU out at the Marriott Center 77-66. And in that game, AJ DeBanza put up 28 points, and it still wasn't enough, and that was with Richie Saunders in the lineup. I just feel right now, without Richie Saunders, BYU is not going to have enough scoring to keep up with Houston because their offense has been improved. Also, Houston has a top 6 defense in the country, and if they're able to stay locked in on AJ DeBanza and Robert Wright, I just don't know if there's any other guy on there that can really go get their own bucket or keep them afloat when that happens. So right now, I still am going with Houston. I also think they have the better backcourt in Kingston Flemings, Milos Uzan, and Emmanuel Sharp. And right now, it just feels like Houston's starting to trend in the right direction after that 3-game skid they had near the end of conference play. So I like the Cougars to advance in this one and beat BYU to make it to the semifinals. And in our last game of the quarterfinals, we have TCU taking on Kansas, and this is going to be TCU's second game in back-to-back days and Kansas's first game in the Big 12 tournament. As I mentioned, TCU right now on a tear, has won their last 5 games and has won 8 of their last 9. In Kansas, they were able to finish the regular season with a big win over Kansas State and got that offense back on the right trajectory, scoring 104 points on the Wildcats in their one matchup with TCU on the season. Kansas was able to come back at the very end, force overtime, and beat the TCU Horned Frogs 104-100 at Allen Fieldhouse. And right now, I believe Darren Peterson's gonna play because he has been playing in the last couple of games. So I do believe he is back and ready to go. And I think with Darren Peterson in the lineup for a full 40 minutes, I think this Kansas Jayhawks team is going to be a bit too much for TCU. I know TCU right now is on a really good win streak and they're doing a lot of things well, but Kansas, when they're fully healthy, I truly believe they're one of the better teams, not only in the Big 12, but in the country. And although it's been a bit up and down so far this season, I do think come postseason, Bill Self is going to have this team right, and they're going to be ready to go. I also think Kansas, specifically Flory Badunga and Bryson Tiller, should be able to thrive in this matchup with TCU being a bit undersized there at the center position. So I like that matchup. And then obviously you have the best player in the game in Darren Peterson. I think it's going to be too much for the Horned Frogs. So give me the Jayhawks to advance to the semifinals. So in our first semifinal matchup, we have Iowa State taking on Arizona. And like I mentioned, Arizona right now just looks like one of the most dominant teams in the country. When you're looking at lineups, Arizona has a great backcourt in Jaden Bradley and Anthony Del Orso. but they'll be going up against a really good defensive backcourt in Taman Lipsey and Killian Torre for the Cyclones. At the wing position, I really like Milan Momcilovic. I also think Joshua Jefferson can play in the front court, but also the wing, and so they might have a slight edge there. But then obviously in that front court, it's Koa Pete, Toby Owaka, and Mo Krivas. I just don't know if Blake Buchanan is enough for the Cyclones to stick with that. In their previous matchup in the regular season, Iowa State traveled to Arizona and honestly just got blown out from the beginning, ended up losing by 16 points, but Arizona dominated that game from the jump. They limited Iowa State to less than 24% from the three-point line, and Iowa State actually is one of the better shooting three-point teams in the country. Also, they just went ahead and dominated them in just about every facet, out-rebounded them as well, both on the defense and offensive end. I truly think that Arizona right now in this matchup is just a bit too big for Iowa State, and I don't think Iowa State has enough in the front court to stay with what Koa Pete and Mo Krivas can do for them. And then Ivan Karchinkov, he's the type of guy that could lock down a Milan Momcilovic, and I would choose Arizona's backcourt over Iowa State's backcourt right now. So although I would like to pick it upset, I think Arizona is another team in the country right now that you just can't really pick against, it feels like, especially in this type of matchup with what we've seen previously. So I got to go with Arizona to advance to the championship game. And then it's either going to be Houston or Kansas going up against Arizona in the championship game. And in this one, it really goes back and forth for me. When Houston went on the road to Kansas, they actually ended up taking a loss at Allen Fieldhouse and lost by 14 points against the Jayhawks in that one. It really wasn't a great showing from Kingston Flemings, who was very inefficient in that game. And then for Kansas, it was Darren Peterson and Melvin Council and Trey White all dropping over 20 points in that one. Now, with this rematch, I do think things will go a bit differently. Both of these teams have really great defenses. Both are top 10 in adjusted defensive efficiency, according to KenPom. In the backcourt, you have Darren Peterson and Melvin Council for Kansas going up against Kingston Flemings and Milos Uzan. Wings, it's Trey White and Emmanuel Sharp. And then in the front court, it's Flory Badunga, Bryson Tiller, and JoJo Tugler and Chris Sinak. So I really think this is a pretty even matchup, but right now I have to think that if they were to play again, Kelvin Sampson would have this team ready to go. Also, it wouldn't be on the road at Allen Fieldhouse. And I think Kingston Flemings would have a bit of a better game. So I'm actually going to be picking Houston to get the revenge and beat Kansas in this matchup to advance to the finals, where they'll take on the Arizona Wildcats. So in our Big 12 championship matchup, we have the Arizona Wildcats as the 1 seed going up against the 2 seed in the Houston Cougars. And all season long, to me, these have been the two best teams in the Big 12. And even though Houston has gone on a bit of a slide here or there, they still finished the season 14-4, right behind Arizona, who went 16-2 in Big 12 play. They did match up one time in the regular season when Arizona went on the road to Houston, and they were able to get the win 73-66, and that was without Koa Pete in that one. Although in that game, Houston did have a chance in the second half to pull away when they were in the lead, but it was Arizona who was able to get back on the right side and just never took their foot off the gas. I think if this were to be a rematch, if you look at how that game went, Houston really did match up well with them in just about every single facet, although Arizona shot almost 10 more free throws than Houston. So I do believe if the Cougars could limit their fouls a little more and shoot a bit better from the perimeter, that Houston actually would have been able to win that game. And this going to be on a neutral floor, so they're not going to be at home, but both teams going to be traveling over to Kansas City for this matchup. I like the backcourt of Houston just a bit more with Kingston Flemings there over Braden Burries and Jaden Bradley. And then when you look at the front court, if Houston's front court can lock down on the defensive end, and if Chris Sinak can do a bit more than just settle for threes, I would like this front court to try and get in the paint and get some easy points there. I do think they have an opportunity to upset Arizona, and with way these conference tournaments go. They don't always go as planned, so I am going to have Houston beating Arizona in the Big 12 championship game to win the conference tournament, and Houston will have a chance to become a 1 seed if Florida gets upset in the SEC tournament with their win of the Big 12 tournament. But that wraps it up for this one. Let me know in the comments down below what your thoughts are on my Big 12 tournament predictions. Who would you have it winning it all out of the Big 12? Also, if you enjoyed the content, make sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.